everyone, I'm Swastika, and this is Tuesdays with Trailblazers, the space where we spotlight bold minds reshaping the way we work, lead, and grow. Today, we are diving into the complexities of modern workforce planning, from unpredictable staffing to rising labor cost, with someone who's helping businesses flex smarter, not harder. Joining me is James Terry, of Revenue at Indeed Flex. James, welcome to the podcast. How's your day going so far?
It's going great so far.
And let's start with the questions. So let's start with your current role in Indeed Flex. What's your key focus right now, and how are you helping companies rethink workforce planning in today's unpredictable labor market?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my role, I work very specifically with a lot of our clients that are struggling to be able to not just fill their need of for labor, but it's really not just about filling it, but it's about speed and quality. So how can you make sure that you're able to get the best workers and the best labor in the door quickly? And that's an area that over the past 4 or 5 years has been a big struggle for customers and for businesses. Really, during the pandemic, there was a huge spike in the availability of labor. And then there was like a redistribution of labor across the job market. And then it became very, very difficult to hire people. And now we have a new generation entering the labor force that, quite frankly, has different needs and different requirements. And so it's really important that businesses are continuously adapting and evolving their way of identifying and really attracting the top labor in this economy.
Labor costs are rising and staffing has become increasingly volatile, right? From your perspective, what are forward-thinking companies doing differently to stay agile and cost-efficient and resilient at the same time?
So I would say the number one thing that businesses are doing to stay agile and cost-efficient are looking at data, because ultimately data helps inform you of what changes and edits and improvements you can make within your labor planning. So that's number one is looking at the data. And really this falls largely on the HR and talent acquisition team. Too often HR and talent acquisition look at the permanent labor that they hire, their direct employees, and then also temporary or contingent labor as separate entities. But in reality, in talent acquisition, you are acquiring talent. It doesn't matter who gets the tax form at the end of the year. At the end of the day, these are the workers that are providing a value and service to your organization. And so really looking holistically at what your strategy is when hiring permanent versus hiring temporary work is very important. The second part of it is, okay, so now we have all this data. Now we have a bevy of information. What do we do with it? Well, ultimately, talent acquisition and HR, they're not the end decision makers into how they are actually leveraging this labor. Largely, it's the operational teams. And so it's really important to take this data, understand it, and then be able to effectively go to the different operational teams within the organization to be able to make suggestions about changes that they can leverage to be able to drive better outcomes. So as an example, if you're looking at it and saying, wow, if we have 5 locations and one of them has very high turnover rate, let's look at why this location has a higher turnover rate. Is that because we have a different shift pattern? Because we're sending workers home early? Is it because maybe there's an issue with the management at that particular site and there's an opportunity for upskilling? But taking that information and that data and then being able to go to the operational team and make really strong suggestions is really critical. And one of the things that we really find is helping is as we provide this data and as we provide this consultation, we're able to then allow HR to position themselves more as a trusted advisor within the business. So rather than HR being thought of as more of a cost center, they're able to be a really trusted part of the organization and help to drive improvements and changes.
Thank you so much for answering that. I mean, it was really, really crystal clear to understand. But now that we are seeing automation reshape anything from like recruiting to scheduling stuffs, right? So in your way, where does that human element still need to be in front and center when it comes to workforce?
It's interesting because especially in HR has historically been an area in business where there's a lot of manual touch points. There's a lot of human beings clicking buttons and signing forms and whatnot. And so as you see automation and AI becoming more front and center right now, a lot of people in HR are saying, okay, well, where does this fit? Where does this fit in? And what I'm noticing within the industry broadly, from the standpoint of the different products that are coming out that help drive efficiencies, as well as the way that a lot of customers and businesses are focusing, is they're saying, what is the full span or life cycle of the different processes that we have? And then what are the things that really are value added by having a human involved? And what are the things that we can automate? At the end of the day, AI is not about just taking people's jobs. AI is about making people more efficient and more effective in doing their jobs. And so if you look at really anyone, this isn't just HR, but anyone's job, there are probably 70% of it is like thought based in HR, and 30% of it can be administrative. And so think about how empowering it is to be able to go to an organization and say, these are the different areas where we are going to allow you to be more effective by using AI and automation to remove the need for that 30%, so that you can focus 80, 90, 100% of your time on the things that are really value added. I mean, ultimately, if you really think about this, what do people like doing in their job? They don't like having to do the administrative stuff. They don't like having to do the tick the box exercises. They want to be doing the thought. They want to be able to consult. They want to be able to partner with different parts of the organization. And that's a critical part of HR and running a business. They are ultimately consultants about how to manage more effectively human capital. And so one of the things that's really important is let's find, and I would encourage everyone who's listening is in HR, in talent acquisition, to think about what are the different things that you do that ultimately you don't like doing, that are the things that you could probably automate. And let's find a way to automate them, and then take that extra time that you have and think about what are the areas that you can provide, services you can provide to the business that are going to add value and help the business operate more effectively, more efficiently, partner better with operations, be more of an advisor to finance, work to make sure you're maintaining costs and driving stronger retention. Those are the types of things that are really important right now.
Right, right. I genuinely do like get what you are saying, because it is really important to understand that perspective where you can actually use automation in a better way in your day-to-day workspace. So yeah, but coming back to the next question, Iniflex operates across diverse markets like the US, the UK, and beyond, right? So what's something that's genuinely surprised you about how different regions approach talent and strategy workforce management?
If I had to put it in a nutshell, I would say it's the organizations that are proactive versus the organizations that are reactive. So when you think about staffing, all too often, talent acquisition gets a call and, then it's like the alarms are going off from the operations team. Hey, we need a bunch of people. We need a bunch of people tomorrow, or we needed a bunch of people 3 days ago. And that becomes a very reactive exercise. And so you're not able to really strategize on what the right way is to bring in the right talent. Whereas customers and organizations that tend to be more proactive about their labor planning, partner with the operations team by using data, as I had mentioned, have a lot better success. So I'll give you an example. If you have an organization where, the fulfillment rate for your labor needs are consistently low, but you find that you're usually spending a lot of money because you have more overtime. Managers are booking a lot of workers last minute, and it just seems to be a bit this revolving door of talent. People come, people go. I'm trying to backfill. We're always caught flat-footed. And when ultimately staffing agencies are thought of as a Band-Aid instead of a partner, you can tell there's really no clear ownership over workforce performance data. If HR and ops aren't collaborating and these things we're completely chasing our tail all the time very consistently, you end up having problems. Whereas if you're able to really use the data and say, how can we more effectively run our business in a way that's going to be more forward thinking? We know, as an example, that the week before Memorial Day, which is next week, we always have a big influx and spike in labor. How can we make sure that we're more effectively planning ahead of time so that doesn't catch us off guard next time? Those are the types of really important things that I find that proactive mindset is how a lot of organizations are setting themselves apart. And that's driving better quality. That's driving better consistency. Ultimately, do you know what that's driving? Better outcomes for this business and for their clients. They're getting their product out the door. They're delivering a better service. There's lower wait times. There's better SLAs. And that's how the HR and operations team can partner together to have a really meaningful impact on the business and the bottom line.
That's really insightful and amazing. Thank you so much for answering that. But often teams fall into this reactive hiring patterns without realizing it, right? What are some early warnings that a company is shifting away from strategic planning, and what they can do to correct it?
I would say the biggest thing you'll find is when you don't have visibility and you don't know. So all too often we find that businesses will say, we handle our full-time hiring, and the operations team handles the contingent labor, the contingent workforce. And every once in a while we get a call saying, oh, we need a bunch of people. We need you to hire these people full-time. And I say, okay, well, why am I just finding out about this now? Oh, well, the staffing agencies weren't able to fill the work for me. And so what you find is a situation where the HR and the talent acquisition team are being told after the staffing agencies are finding out about this. And so they're being given a lower amount of time to be able to fill that role, when in reality, it should flip, right? When there's a need at a site level for an organization in a warehouse, in a call center environment, hospitality, whatever it might be, in those types of situations, you should pick up the phone and have a conversation with your talent acquisition business partners. They should be the first to know, and then they can make that decision about whether or not we should be hiring a permanent workforce or we should be hiring temporary labor. And maybe it's a little bit of both, but ultimately you're setting up your internal business partners to fail when the operations team is only telling the HR and talent acquisition teams too late in the game. They're not giving them enough time to react. And ultimately, when you don't have enough time to react, you're not focusing as much on quality, you're focusing more on speed. And so what ends up happening, it's a vicious cycle. You end up hiring a bunch of people just because you're trying to move fast, as opposed to hiring people that are going to be quality and be consistent workforce. So you're not spending as much time vetting them potentially, and you end up having a workforce that's not as strong.
But this is something from my end, James, if you would want to answer this. Related to similar situation, has it ever happened to you? Has it ever occurred similar situation where this sort of things have happened, and how have you managed it?
Yeah, so what we typically do is we partner with our talent acquisition and HR teams to help them play more of a strategic role within the labor planning. As I mentioned, too often they tend to be very reactive, and that's not their own fault. It's because that's the way that the business has always functioned. So what we'll typically do is get with an organization and say, hey, how can we help to build the bridge? And a lot of the time, this is where it gets into technology creating efficiencies, is if you can have the requests and the needs for labor all flow through one system, in this case, Indeed Flex, then it gives the talent acquisition team the ability to make a decision at a point in time. So right when a request is raised, talent acquisition has that visibility, and they have the ability in certain circumstances to be able to approve that going to a staffing agency, or decline it and say, hey, you know what? We actually are quite confident that we can fill this role ourselves through our own direct supply of labor. And that visibility and that ability to be able to make a decision allows for the HR, talent acquisition, and operational teams to have a stronger partnership. So there's more communication and collaboration. Therefore, when those orders come in and when that need comes in, there's a decision point that can be made, as opposed to being very reactive after the fact.
The explosion of data and tech, it's easy to get overwhelmed, right? So what specific metrics of insights do you believe HR and operation leaders should focus on to truly optimize labor spend and staffing efficiency?
Great question. So, because you're right, there is so much data out there, and before you know it, you get into analysis paralysis. So, number one question I would ask to those in HR or talent acquisition that are listening right now is, do you know how much you spend in temporary labor each year? If the answer to that is no, or I'm not sure, then that's a big problem. As I had mentioned before, HR and talent acquisition, their role is to be the human resources, the human capital management managers, to be the talent acquisition, regardless of the source of these candidates. And so if you don't even know how much or the volume of labor you're using from one source or another, that's probably a problem. So I think that's the first thing, is, do you know how much you're spending? From there, how many staffing agencies do you use? How many staffing agencies do you use at each of the different sites? What is your fulfillment rate at each of the different sites? Which staffing agency is performing best, has the lowest turnover, has the highest retention rate? If you understand that data, then you're able to help consult with the operational teams on making the right decisions. But ultimately, I'd say it's like those key metrics is how much you spend, how many agencies you use, what the fulfillment and retention rate is. And then, by the way, probably one of the most important is, how is a decision made when a need comes in on A, are we going to hire this permanent or are we going to hire this temporary? Is there a decision criteria? Is there a framework for making that decision? And then the second thing is, if we decide we're going to use a staffing agency, how are we deciding which staffing agency? Some clients might say, hey, speed is the most important. the agency that can fill the fastest. That's fine. Some might say, hey, you know what? Speed isn't as important, but the retention and the quality of the worker is more important. And then some organizations might say, hey, you know what? We're just going to use the lowest cost staffing agency. It's not that there's any right or wrong answer within that. We can help consult you. Organizations should have the data ultimately, though, to be able to understand what is the decision framework and how are we making these decisions? Because it's not that there's an objective right or wrong answer to those three options I gave you around speed, quality, and cost. But ultimately, those are the three levers that you can pull. But you can't have all three of them, right? If you want a low cost model, you're probably going to have to pay for it in speed or in quality, and vice versa across the other two components. So at least understanding what is important to you and then how those that priorities are playing out in the decisions you're making is really critical.
Thank you so much for answering that. I mean, the 3 points that anyone should keep in mind before they go ahead of their decision making, it's really important. But coming back to, if you had to offer just one piece of advice to the HR leaders trying to modernize their workforce strategy in 2025, what would be?
This one is a question I get a lot of the time. And the answer is probably something that HR teams won't like to hear. But I'm going to be honest. So I think that the biggest thing that HR teams can do is be an advocate for the worker, be an advocate for the employee. And there's a very critical reason for that. The reason is because you are ultimately going to help receive and get better outcomes for the overall organization if you are an advocate for the employee. Now, here's what I mean by that. Quite often, the HR team takes requests and needs and headcount amounts and numbers and all that from the operational team and then goes to market and says, well, here's what the operational team has given me. Here's what the warehouse manager or the call center manager has given me as far as the needs. This is what we have to fill. And maybe within that, it's really complex background check and really complex long interview processes. Maybe it is a significant amount of experience. Maybe it's a very rigid shift pattern, whatever that might be. But a lot of the times HR takes that and just goes to market with it. But in reality, that's not necessarily the best thing for the workforce. That might be what works for the operational teams, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is what works for workers. As we see this new generation, Gen Z, entering the labor force right now, they value flexibility so highly. They value the ability to be able to have more of a say in the way and manner in which they're working. For them, a lot of the times, it's more important to be able to have Wednesday afternoon off to be able to take grandma to the doctor or to be able to handle childcare responsibilities. And so there is a contingent of the workforce that needs a little bit more flexibility. This is why you see rideshare apps. This is why you see the food delivery apps that are out there, is because people are demanding a little bit more flexibility in the way that they're working. And so it's important for the HR and talent acquisition team to be able to go back to the operational team and say, look, there are changes that you need to make to be able to make the role more attractive. We can continue to bring people in and force them into this role or this difficult shift pattern or whatever it might be. But ultimately, these people are going to leave very quickly. And so if you want to be able to drive retention, drive quality, get the best candidates, sometimes as a business, you have to make a trade-off. And that trade-off sometimes is, hey, you know what? Maybe we are going to have people that are not going to work every single day the same exact shift pattern. Maybe they're going to be able to flex in and flex out a little bit more. And it's not that you're going to have a different person every day. You're going to have the same 20 or 30 people, but it might be a different one each day. And it's important for organizations to be able to get comfortable with the fact that the economy is changing. I mean, think about it. You can go online and order any one of the millions and millions of products to be delivered to your house the next morning at 5 a.m. And so people are demanding this type of flexibility as consumers. Those same people are the people that are also going to work every day. They demand more flexibility, more choice, and more control in their work life as well.
That was really, really insightful. I mean, I understand I'm Gen Z myself, so what you said is actually very much relatable. Thank you so much for answering that. And before we wrap up, a very personal question. What's one mindset shift that, or a habit or a belief that helped you to lead better, adapt faster, or blaze your own trail in this very fast moving world?
Thank you for that question. I'm actually going to use one that's a little bit off of the question you asked me previously, because I hope that my advice can help to empower all the HR teams that are listening on the line right now. I would say that the piece of advice I would give is bad news does not get better with time. Feedback is a gift, and feedback needs to be given directly and immediately. And sometimes, as leaders or as business partners, we can be apprehensive to be too direct and honest about things that we see that need to be improved. But ultimately, it's our job as stewards of the organization and whatever part of the business that we are part of to be honest about things that we think could be improved or changes that we think should be made. And so I think sometimes when we know that there's a piece of feedback or that we know that there's an area that needs to be improved upon, it can be hard, it can be difficult, it can be uncomfortable, it can be awkward to go and have a direct conversation with someone about an area that just it puts everyone a little bit off guard. But ultimately, bad news does not get better with time. It's important to be honest and direct about the feedback to be able to allow everyone to improve, because at the end of the day, if you kick the can down the road, do you know who you're actually doing a disservice to? You're doing a disservice to the person that you're not telling the feedback to. If we have a foundation of trust and honesty within an organization where everyone knows that we have a shared vision and a shared goal of growth and improvement, then that feedback should be welcomed. And if we have that foundation, then everyone should know that when I give feedback or when I have suggestions, it's coming from a place of us all wanting to succeed together. So I think my advice would be, bad news does not get better with time. Just be honest.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you so much for answering all the questions. Thank you so much for telling how to navigate today's workforce challenges. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you today. And to all our subscribers and listeners, don't forget to leave a comment or a review. This is your host, Swastika, signing off.